there's a photograph sitting in a digital archive that at first looks like an ordinary family picture. A family in their living room, all dressed in clean Sunday clothes. But if you look closer, just a little to the left, there is something in a wooden chair at the edge of the photo that historians could not explain. A small handmade figure of a boy, wearing a tiny white shirt and dark trousers, sitting upright as if he belonged there. And his hair is nothing like what you would expect on a handmade doll. What secret was this family keeping? What story did they bring into that room on the day the photo was taken? The answer would take more than 100 years to come out, and when it did, it would change how we understand what it means to love someone you were never allowed to grieve openly. Before we start, if stories like this touch you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every week we uncover the hidden stories that old photographs have kept for decades. And let's go back to 1910. It was a Tuesday morning in October 2021 when James Whitfield first opened the file. He was a historian and archivist at a university in Nashville, Tennessee. At 43 years old, he had spent 17 years sorting through old photographs from the American South. He had seen thousands of images from the early 1900s, serious faces, formal poses, and the quiet stillness people showed when they knew they were being photographed. He was not someone who got easily moved by pictures. One morning, though, something made him stop. The image had been given to the university's digital archive by a small county historical society in rural Georgia. It came with almost no information, just an estimated date of 1910 and a short handwritten note on the back of the original photo that said, "For those who come after us." There were no names, no location, and no explanation. James nearly moved on to the next image. The photograph showed a black family of 5 posing in their living room. A man and a woman sat in the center with 3 children around them. The youngest child stood close to her mother's knee. They were all dressed with great care. The man wore a dark suit with a white collar. The woman's dress was high-necked and spotless. The children looked clean and serious, the way kids do when adults have warned them many times not to move. The room was simple but neat. A patterned rug lay on the floor. A framed picture hung on the wall behind them, slightly tilted. A small side table held a ceramic lamp. Everything in the frame showed a family that had worked hard to build a good life with pride and care. James studied their faces. The man's jaw looked firm and dignified. The woman's eyes looked straight at the camera with an expression James could not quite describe. It was not exactly sadness or pride, but something in between, something deeper than both. He was about to record the photograph and move on when his eyes drifted to the left edge of the frame. There, in a small wooden chair pushed against the wall, sat a small handmade figure. It was dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt. At first, James almost did not notice it. Then he looked again. Something about it felt different. He could not say exactly what, but his hand moved to the zoom button before he even formed the full question in his mind. James enlarged the image. The picture was surprisingly clear for its time. He could see the texture of the rug and the grain of the wooden chair. As the small figure filled his screen, he leaned forward and felt something change inside him. The figure was a handmade boy doll. The body was sewn from plain cotton fabric and stuffed carefully by someone who knew how to sew, though not a professional. It wore a small white shirt with a collar, dark trousers that were neatly hemmed, and tiny suspenders, the kind of Sunday clothes a young boy in that time would wear to church. Someone had taken real time and care with every now, but it was the hair that made him pause. Most handmade dolls from that period used yarn, thread, or pieces of fabric for hair because it was cheap and easy. This boy doll had none of those. His hair was dark, thick, and fine, with small, tight curls that caught the light in a way that fabric and thread never could. James had looked at enough old photos to know the difference between yarn and real human hair. This was real hair, and it had been carefully placed on the doll to look like a boy. He sat back. His coffee grew cold without him noticing. The details were powerful. Not just the real hair, but the exact way the doll was dressed, its formal pose, and the way it had been given its own chair at the edge of the family portrait. This was not just decoration or a toy left in the background. The figure had been dressed for the occasion. It had its own seat. It had been placed there to be seen. James took out his notebook and wrote 2 questions at the top of a fresh page. And first, whose hair is this? Second, why is this boy doll in a family portrait? He did not know yet that finding the answers would take him almost a full year. He did not know the answers would be both simpler and more painful than he could imagine. He only knew from years of working with old records that this photograph was asking him something important, and he planned to find out what it was. James did not rush. That was not his way. He finished his cataloging work for the rest of that Tuesday. But the image stayed open on his screen. He kept returning to it between other tasks, studying the boy doll from different angles, hoping a new look might give him answers. By Wednesday morning, he had decided what to do next. He contacted a colleague in the university's forensic anthropology department, Dr. Patricia Owens. She had years of experience studying biological materials from history. He sent her a clear close-up of the doll's hair with a short message. "I need your informal opinion." "Is this what I think it is?" Her reply came 3 hours later. 4 simple words. Yes, without any doubt. They met for coffee that afternoon. Patricia brought a printed copy of the enlarged image and placed it on the table. She pointed with her pen and said the curl pattern, the thickness, and the way it caught the light showed this was human hair, very likely African American hair. Whoever made the doll had used a lot of real hair to give the figure a full head of hair like a real. Now, James asked if the hair could have come from a living person, maybe from a haircut. Patricia thought carefully and said it was possible, but the amount and the care suggested this was not casual. The hair was used to make the doll look like a specific boy. The clothing was also very specific: the white shirt, the suspenders, the dark trousers. This doll was meant to represent a real child that the family knew. The word hung in the air between them. "Victorian morning hair," James said, and quietly. "Exactly," Patricia replied. It was a common practice in many communities well into the early 1900s, especially where people had few resources or official ways to remember their loss. You kept what you could and made what you needed. But I have never seen it done exactly like this, turned into a figure, dressed as a specific child and placed in a family portrait. Whoever made this clearly wanted that boy to be part of the photograph. James looked again at the 5 living faces, and beside them in his own chair, the small figure in Sunday clothes with real hair on its head, there was a 6th member of this family. The photograph had no names. That was the first big problem. For Black American families in 1910, finding names from one photo was especially difficult because of how often they were left out of official records, censuses, and archives. James started with what the image could tell him. The family was likely from Georgia. The room looked like it belonged to a rural, in her small-town home. The quality of the clothes showed a family that was not rich but had enough to live with dignity. The man appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s. The woman was a bit younger. They had 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy who looked between about 6 and 12 years old. He checked the donation records from the Historical Society. The photo had come as part of a larger collection given in 2008 by the estate of an elderly woman in Meriwether County, Georgia, who had died, and without direct heirs. The collection had mostly stayed in boxes until it was digitized years later. James called the Historical Society and spoke with a volunteer named Dorothy who had helped with the original sorting. She remembered the collection vaguely: boxes of papers, photos, and household items. When James asked if there were any names, Dorothy thought for a moment and said there had been a family Bible that went to the county library. Old family Bibles often had important records, and written inside births, marriages, and deaths. It was worth checking. James drove to Meriwether County that Friday. The small library smelled of old wood and books. The librarian, a young man named Calvin, found the Bible quickly. It was a worn King James version with a cracked cover and a front page filled with handwriting. James stood at the desk and read the faded names. His finger stopped at one line written in a shakier hand near the bottom. Samuel, born March 3, 1903, departed February 1910, age 7. The photo was from 1910. James closed the Bible gently and stood still for a moment. The boy doll in the photograph wore a white shirt and dark suspenders, exactly the clothes a 7-year-old boy would wear to church. There had been a 6th member of this family, and his name was Samuel. The name settled into James's research like a stone dropped into calm water. He stayed in the library for 2 more hours, carefully photographing every page of the Bible. Along with the birth and death records, there were underlined verses, a pressed flower, and a child's simple pencil drawing tucked in the back. The drawing showed a house, a tree, and a figure with big eyes and open arms drawn with the innocent confidence of a child who did not know his picture would last longer than he would. The Bible did not list a cause of death for Samuel. That was common at the time, especially in rural black communities where death records were often missing details. James would have, in a search further. James sat down slowly. Something that had been very quiet had now become very clear. Before going further, James wanted to understand the full tradition behind this practice. He spent a week reading about it. What he learned was wider and deeper than he first thought. The custom of keeping human hair as a way to remember the dead had old roots in both European and American life. During the Victorian years, families often kept locks of hair from loved ones in lockets, boxes, and framed art. Skilled workers even made beautiful designs woven only from hair. It was a personal and touching way to hold on to something physical from the person who had passed. This practice appeared in many communities, including black families in the South. Because they often had fewer official ways to mark loss, no fancy gravestones, incomplete church records, and rare photographs, keeping physical memories became even more important. What they could hold on to, they kept with care. And a doll with the child's own hair and dressing it in the clothes the child would have worn was not every day, but it had happened before in African American mourning traditions after the Civil War. It was a way to keep grief present inside the home and to quietly insist that the child's life had mattered in a world that often tried to ignore it. What made Samuel's case stand out was how detailed the figure was. This was not just a lock of hair in a locket. Ada had made a full boy doll. She had dressed him as Samuel would have been dressed. She had used Samuel's own hair. And then she had given him his own place in the family portrait, as if to say he still belonged with them. James read a line from a 1994 study that stayed with him. An elderly black woman in Georgia remembered watching her grandmother make such a figure after losing a child. The woman recalled her grandmother saying, "The child needed to still be in the house. A mother does not stop being a mother just because the nailed is gone." James read it twice. Then he looked again at Ada's face in the photo, that quiet expression between sadness and strength, and he understood what he was seeing. James now had names: Thomas and Ada, their son Samuel, a death in early 1910, and a portrait taken sometime after. But he wanted to know more about Ada and the choice she had made. He went back to the church records in Meriwether County and spent an afternoon reading entries from 1905 to 1920. He found Thomas and Ada enlisted as church members and baptism records for their children. Then, in the meeting notes from April 1910, 2 months after Samuel's death, he found something new. The notes mentioned church members discussing help for families hurt by the tuberculosis outbreak. Thomas and Ada's family was listed. It said Ada had been sick herself that winter but had recovered. It also noted that the family had asked for a formal portrait to be taken, something the church sometimes helped arrange to mark important moments in life. A portrait taken after sickness and loss. A mother who had almost died, who had lived when her son had not, who then dressed her other children in their best clothes, stood with her husband, and made sure a small doll made with her dead son's hair, dressed in real boy's clothes, was placed in a chair before the camera clicked. James thought about how much strength that decision had taken. Not only the deep grief, but the courage to insist that Samuel still be included, in the only way she could. She had sewn the figure with her own hands while still getting better from her illness. She had carefully attached the hair she had saved from her son's head and dressed the doll in the white shirt, dark trousers, and small suspenders that Samuel would have worn if he had been there. There was something else James kept thinking about. The photograph had lasted. It had passed through more than 100 years, through the deaths of everyone who once knew its secret. It had reached a digital archive in Nashville, still holding its story quietly inside. Ada had made something that would endure. She had not known it would. She had only known she needed to do it. James read the email 3 times before replying. He asked carefully, "Did your family's stories ever mention an old photograph?" Diane's answer came the next morning. She had called her 91-year-old mother and asked about old family pictures. Her mother had been quiet for a long time, then said there was, and one special portrait. Mama Ruth had always said it was different, that there was something in it the family knew about but did not speak of much. She had said her mother had put love into that picture in a way outsiders would not understand. James sat with those words for a long time. He picked up the phone and called Diane. He arranged to meet Diane and her mother in Atlanta on a Saturday in June. He brought a large printed copy of the photograph and all his research papers, the Bible, and records, church notes, information about mourning hair traditions, and details of the tuberculosis outbreak. He wanted them to see the full journey, not just the end. They met at Diane's quiet home in southwest Atlanta. Her mother, Loretta, sat in a tall chair watching everything closely. James unrolled the photograph on the coffee table. Diane leaned in right away. Loretta became very still, but the message that stayed with James the most came from Diane 2 weeks after the article came out. And she wrote to say that her mother, Loretta, had read the full article slowly with her glasses and a cup of tea. When she finished, Loretta had sat quietly for a while, then said, "I want you to thank that man. Tell him that Samuel has a name again." James read those words at his desk on an October afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after he had first opened the file and noticed something unusual in a small wooden chair at the edge of the frame. He thought about Ada in the winter of 1910, the loss, and the careful way she had arranged the portrait. He thought about her cutting fabric, stitching the body, gently pressing her son's saved hair into place, and dressing the doll in Sunday clothes. He thought about her carrying the figure to the chair and positioning it so it faced the camera just like the others, quietly saying in the only way she could that her family was not 5, but 6. She could not have known that a historian would one day find the photograph. She could not have known that the hair she saved would carry her son's story into a future she would never see. She had simply done what she needed to do, what any mother might do when the world gave her no other way to say, "He was here, he was mine, he mattered." The photograph had always held that truth. It had simply been waiting for someone to look closely enough to see it. Some images are not just records of the past. They are quiet letters written to the future, sealed with love and grief, and waiting for anyone patient enough to read them.